Hi guys, today I want to talk about being self-employed and freelance and what that's like. It's a video that I've been wanting to make for ages, but it's so subjective to everyone who undertakes it that it's difficult to offer advice as such. But today I'm going to talk about my experience of working and transitioning from being employed by someone to being self-employed, and then I'm going to give you my top tips as well. This was also going to include a Q&A where I answered your questions on being freelance and self-employed, but I realized that will be a ridiculously long video if I include that too. So I'm going to do a separate video where I answer your questions on the subject too. This video is very, very kindly sponsored by Skillshare, which I'll talk more about in a bit. The first thing that I want to do is talk you through my experience of work in general, both as an employed person and as a self-employed person, because as I said, everyone's journey and how they maintain their self-employed status is completely subjective, and I think that sometimes it's just helpful to hear someone tell you how they did it, even if it's not how you're going to do it. So first off, I'd worked during the summers as a receptionist and also worked in retail. Then I went to Edinburgh University to do my degree in English literature, and I decided that I would like a part-time job working as a bookseller. I got a job working at the Edinburgh Bookshop, which is a fantastic bookshop, and the way that I actually got that job is that the previous summer they had advertised a 2-week internship working at their small publishing house, which they also had within the bookshop. I was that intern. When I finished my 2 weeks internship, I saw they were advertising for a part-time bookseller. I applied, they knew who I was, we got on well, they hired me. So I worked there during the final couple of years of my degree, and when I graduated I was actually offered a full-time job in Edinburgh, but I turned that down to move down to London with my partner who was doing postgrad stuff down here. I also wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. My end goal was to be an author, and that has always been my end goal, and I've talked about that in a video called Why I Read and Write, which I will link in the description. It's a very old video, but the message in that still stands. That was my end goal, but I wasn't sure whether I wanted to continue bookselling or whether I wanted to go into publishing. And I'm going to talk more about working within the industry that you want to freelance in a little bit. So I wasn't sure which of these two fields I wanted to stay in while I tried to make it as an author outside of my work time. I believed incorrectly that to get into publishing you needed an MA in publishing, a postgraduate degree in publishing, and that is not true. You can do those and they are very, very helpful, but obviously they cost a lot of money to do. I had decided I would do an MA in publishing, and I actually put a down payment, a small deposit from the money I'd saved working at the Edinburgh Bookshop to do a degree in publishing. But when I moved down to London, I got called up for jury service. I was stuck on a 6-month trial, and because of that I didn't earn enough money to do that MA, and I had to cancel the course and didn't get my deposit back, which it still hurts me to this day anyway. So because of that, and also because I'd done a few internships at publishing houses and hadn't loved it as much as bookselling, I enjoyed it a lot, but bookselling was where my heart was, I decided I would stay in bookselling. So I got a job working full-time as a bookseller in London. So while I was working as a bookseller, I was going to say during my weekends and evenings I wrote, but no, because as a bookseller you work weekends. So during my evenings I was writing. I was also getting up before work at 5 a.m. to get in an hour of writing where I could, just trying to work on different individual projects. I wasn't pitching for things. I was focusing on writing poetry and sending that to competitions and journals, and writing short stories and also sending those to competitions and journals to raise my profile as a writer, and also to bring in a little bit of money, though that really wasn't much. And I've made a video talking about how to get published, starting with literary journals up to book publishing. So I will leave a link to that in the description box down below. Working on my writing in this way meant I was getting published in various places. I was building up a writer CV of sorts, and then I got an agent for my fiction work. My agent is Charlie Campbell. He is fantastic. We are not related, even though we have the same last name. I have made a video with Charlie talking about getting an agent as a writer and what that's like, so I will also leave a link to that video in the description box down below. Whilst I was writing, I was obviously working in the book industry and trying to understand it as much as I could. I signed up to receive daily emails from the bookseller, which I'll link in the description box down below, with just familiarising myself with the industry as much as I could. Even though I'd been part of it for several years, you always need to know what's going on in the world. I also set up a blog when I moved to London. I realise I haven't actually given time frames here, but I moved to London in 2009, so nearly 10 years ago, and I was fresh out of university then. I decided to set up a blog because I wanted to review books, and I also wanted to talk about my own writing and to post links to where I was getting published, etc. And that blog no longer exists, but it served its purpose when it did exist. And one day I had been very frustrated by what had gone on at work. I'd received lots of ridiculous questions from customers, rude people, someone had been sick on my shoe. Book selling, I love it dearly, but sometimes it's something else. So I wrote a blog post called Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops, and it went viral. This was never ever supposed to happen, and honestly I am a firm believer in if you work hard enough at something and you try lots of different things, something is going to work somewhere. It just might not be the thing that you expected to work in the beginning, and that's okay. So my blog posts on the weird things that customers say in bookshops went viral. Neil Gaiman was tweeting about them, R.L. Stine was tweeting about them, booksellers everywhere were tweeting about them, and I was completely taken by surprise. I was then approached by a publisher asking if I considered turning these into a book. And up until that point, I hadn't. As I said, I had got an agent for my fiction work, but this was something that came along separately, and I had to consider whether or not this is something that I wanted to do. I decided to take it. It was a very happy accident, so I turned Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops into a book. At a similar time, I was sending off my poetry pamphlet manuscript to publishers, and I got a book deal with the Rialto for that, which opened up opportunities in the poetry world that I didn't have before. So I was invited to do poetry readings at various places. I was invited to speak at the Oldborough Poetry Festival. I also submitted to many different things, not just competitions and prizes, but initiatives. I saw a call for Poems on the Underground, and this is not the poems that you see printed on the tube, but this was for another initiative where they were going to animate poems and play them on certain platforms, and I submitted a poem for that, and it was chosen, which was then animated and played across London. So that is what was going on with my poetry. On the Weird Things side, the book came out. I was asked to write a second in the series, which I did. I was going on book tour. I was meeting booksellers and discovering all of these fantastic bookshops like Wigtown, which is Scotland's book town, and I decided that I wanted to write a book about all of these wonderful bookshops, all of them around the world, the strange and the weird, bookshops on boats and on buses. So I pitched this idea to my editor and he said yes, and I went away and I wrote that book. At this point I was still book selling, so when I was doing events at the weekend, I was taking the weekend off work to do that. I was otherwise doing events in the evening so that I wouldn't have to take time off work, but it was very difficult at this point to balance everything. I was effectively doing 2 jobs and it was kind of overwhelming. At that point, when the bookshop book came out, I decided that I wanted to start a YouTube channel. I had discovered the booktube side of YouTube and I was terrified about starting one. I used to be a very self-conscious person. I didn't want to put my hands online. I didn't want any backlash. I just didn't want to do it. But then I met lovely Lena, who I'm sure that most of you know. She has a channel called, I don't know, is it still called Just Kiss My Frog? Or is it just called Lena Norms? I don't know. Anyway, I will link her down below, and she persuaded me that I should set up my YouTube channel. I had enjoyed running my blog up to that point, but because I was writing so much outside of book selling, I wasn't really drawn to writing my blog anymore. I wanted a different way of talking about books, and YouTube I thought was a great way of doing that. I never started this channel for it to become part of my job. I'd started working in an antiquarian bookshop and I missed talking about new books, and BookTube is such a fun space. So that is why I joined, and it's why I continue to make videos. It also has become a small part of my job. It's very, very difficult to work out what part of my job it is. Because everything that I do centers around books, it's hard to work out what feeds into everything. Money-wise, BookTube is a tiny part of my job. If you're not aware, through AdSense on YouTube, you make about $1 per 1,000 views, and that changes depending on the time of year. You get more during the months of December because advertisers are paying more to advertise before Christmas. It's why lots of people do Vlogmas. And then in January, February, March, advertisers aren't paying as much, so you make much less than $1 per 1,000 views. But also the YouTube algorithm changes all the time. You can't predict it. Money-wise, it's a tiny, tiny part of my job, but a lot of my job is being visible and allowing people to find me, which I'm going to talk about more later. And YouTube is definitely a way that I am visible. So there is that. So I started this channel 3.5 years ago. At that point, I was writing Franklin's Flying Bookshop, which was my first children's book. I was also starting to collate short stories and turn that into what would become The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. Because of my 3 books about bookshops, I became known a bit as the bookshop girl. So I was asked to speak on lots of industry panels about book selling, and that also became part of my job. On the writing side, as well as writing books, I was still submitting to literary prizes and to publications, again building up my writing CV, because whilst I had non-fiction published, my heart lay in fiction. That's what I've been writing since I was tiny, so that was the part of my CV that I really felt I needed to build up, if nothing else for my own self-confidence. And I won in 2016 an Eric Gregory Award, which is an award given to poets under 30 by the Society of Authors for a work in progress, and that work in progress was something called the Girl Aquarium. This again meant that more people in the poetry world knew about me, and I was asked to do lots of different workshops. And then I decided to set up my own workshops, online writing workshops for people who could sign up wherever they happen to be in the world. And that's something I've been running for a couple of years now, and I will leave a link to them in the description box down below. We're nearly there. So in summer 2016, I decided to take the leap and become entirely self-employed and to stop book selling. I loved book selling, but I'd gone as far as I could in the field without opening my own bookshop, which wasn't something that I wanted to do. I may do that at some point in the future, who knows, but that wasn't, on my horizon then. So I decided to leave book selling to pursue my writing and my other freelance work. I had, as I said, effectively been doing 2 jobs for a long time. I'd been working very long hours, working weekends, 7-day weeks for too long, and I was turning down work that would further my career as a self-employed person and would also earn me more than what I was doing as a bookseller. And I'd reached that point where it was silly to stay in bookselling if I wanted to progress further as a self-employed individual. I should have probably left, honestly, I should have left sooner than I did, but I was nervous. It's a terrifying thing to become self-employed. It's an uncertain thing because when you start, you're going to be earning less. So I had saved up money so that I would have a buffer so that I could become self-employed and know that it was okay to earn less as I worked out what I was doing. Because also part of my self-employedness involves being an author twice a year, I knew I was going to receive royalties from my books as well, which was reassuring. Obviously, you're only earning royalties as long as your books are selling, but I knew that those were payments that I would definitely be getting, and I had lined up several freelance projects before I left my job as a bookseller so that I knew that I was going into actual work, which was less scary. So since leaving bookselling and become entirely self-employed, I have published several books. Franklin's Flying Bookshop came out, I've written the sequel. I also have another picture book coming out next year too. My short story collection, The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, was released, and I'm currently starting work on a novel. I also have another book coming out next summer, which I can't talk about yet. So I have lots of book projects on the go. As well as doing that, I've expanded this YouTube channel. As I said, this was never supposed to be my job, and it still isn't my job, but it does feed into other things that I do. Primarily, of course, I do it because I love it. I have over 500 videos on this channel, and less than 20 of them are sponsored videos where I work with companies, because I only work with companies that I absolutely love, such as this video here, which is sponsored by Skillshare. You know that I've also worked with Northern Ballet and the Women's Prize for Fiction. I've also continued to run my online writing workshops as well as in-person writing workshops. A new part of my job is judging literary prizes, which has been really fun. I also give talks at universities and at industry events. YouTube has actually helped me in that respect to build my confidence. I know that sounds kind of silly because I'm just speaking to a camera, but before I started YouTube, as I said, I was very self-conscious. So doing author events and doing YouTube has helped me be a better speaker, I think, and just be more confident in myself. And as well as doing events centered around what I do, I'm also happy to chair events, interview authors, host podcasts, etc. for other companies, which has also become part of my job. Okay, I think that covers everything that I've been doing for the last 9 years in a nutshell. Before I get on to my top tips, as I said at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that this video is very kindly sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform. They have over 17,000 videos teaching you how to do various things. Sign up is $10 a month, but Skillshare have very kindly given me a link, which is at the top of the description box down below. And the first 500 people to click on that and sign up for Skillshare get 2 months for just 99 cents, which is about 79 pence. I think in the UK. There are classes on so many different kinds of things. So if you're trying to be freelance, if you're trying to make the move and you need to learn different things, it's a great resource for that. They have classes on business, they have classes on creative things such as illustration and writing, they have classes on how to be more organized, how to set up websites. So if you need to learn a thing to do the thing that you want to do, then Skillshare is a really good place to head to. So I want to give you some top tips. As I said, it's very, very difficult to give advice that is general advice and can be applied to lots of different people when being self-employed and freelance. It is so different for each person, but these are my top tips. Number one, work within the industry that you want to freelance in. This isn't always possible, but I have seen this happen quite a lot with people who say that they want to be freelance, but they don't know what industry they want. They just say, I want to be freelance. And this confuses me because it's like someone saying, I want to have a job. And I have to say, okay, what kind of freelancer do you want to be? What industry do you want to work in? What are you passionate about? I think there is a misconception with freelance life that is easier than going to an office. That is not true. They both have their pros and cons and their difficulties, but being self-employed is really, really tough. You don't get sick pay, you don't get holiday pay, you don't get maternity leave. You do get maternity allowance, which is not the same as maternity leave. It's very, very difficult. You have to be self-motivated, etc., etc., etc. It's not something that you should enter into lightly. Obviously, I recommend it because I do it, but you need to know what you're doing. One of the ways to know what you're doing is to go and work within the industry that you then, as I said, want to be freelance in. It doesn't have to be the specific job that you want to freelance. So for instance, I worked as a bookseller for 10 years. Book selling is not the freelance thing that I was doing. I wanted to be an author and I wanted to do writerly things. But to do that, I felt, as well as honing my craft and practicing writing, which is of course number one, I wanted to understand the book industry. So to work within it helped me with that. And also because I have this YouTube channel, I also do some freelance publicity. I work with companies talking about social media occasionally. I needed to understand the publishing industry in order to be able to work with those people. If you're trying to get clients from outside of the bubble, it's so difficult. You need to know how something works from the inside before you can take your experience and your contacts and then tap into it from the outside. As I said, this is not a rule for everyone. Some jobs I'm sure that wouldn't work for, but I think the majority of the time that is how it works best. Also, I don't know about you, but I can't afford to not have a job. I need to eat, I need to pay rent. So I can't just leave my job with no idea of what I'm doing and try and start out being freelance from scratch whilst having no income. So working in an industry not only means that you're getting to know it, but it's practical because it means that you can eat, and eating is nice. Let's call working within the industry tip 1A. Tip 1B ties in with that and is to understand the industry. So not just working within it, but keeping up to date with how it's evolving and changing and adapting. Make sure if it's something bookish that you're subscribed to the Booksellers Daily newsletter. You might want to go to the SYP, which is the Society of Young Publishers. They put on events. There are things like the London Book Fair. There are lots of different festivals around the UK involving books. You don't have to go to physical events to learn about the industry. You can read about it in newsletters, etc. But just be aware of what is out there and how you can absorb knowledge so that you can better what you're trying to do. Point number 2 is to be visible. This may take various different forms. For instance, social media. I have a Twitter account. This is my Twitter account. As you can see, I've utilized the banner. I have also got a pinned tweet at the top, which has various different ways of contacting me and also lists some of the things that I do so that people can easily see what I'm about. I also have an Instagram page. I use this primarily because it's fun and I like posting pictures of Lola, probably too many pictures of Lola, but again, it has my contact details on. And then also I have this YouTube page, obviously, hi, and I have my website. This is the homepage of my website. It is a free website that I built using Weebly. There are lots of different options. I know lots of people like Squarespace. I have paid for the domain name though. And the homepage is very, very simple. I wouldn't claim to be an amazing web designer, not at all, but places like Weebly make things very, very easy. They're very intuitive. So I have everything laid out very, very simply. On the homepage, it says who I am, what I do, and where I mention specific books, I have linked them. Where I've mentioned projects, I have linked them. And then at the top, as you can see, I have a page about YouTube so people can find out what kind of things I talk about. I have a page where all of my books are listed. Then I have an events page, and if you click on that, you can not only see the events that I've got coming up, but there is a link to see what kind of events I offer, what kind of talks, etc., in case organisations want to get in touch with me. I also have a page where I list all of my writing workshop details, and I have details at the bottom of that page which have previous participants talking about their experience of taking the workshops, which is useful for people who may be considering whether or not they want to take the workshops. I also sell signed copies of my books through my website. Then I have a contact page, which of course has details on how to contact me, but also has details on how to contact my agent and my publicists in case people want to do that. Being visible in this way and laying out how you can work for companies just makes their life easier and your life easier. And it means that if people are searching for certain things, they might stumble across you by accident, as well as finding you because someone has recommended you or you have reached out to them. My third point, we on point 3, yes, is to be organized and utilize your time. I have made a whole video talking about how I schedule my life, so I will link that in the description box down below. Point 4 is work hard and be professional. You would think that these were standard pieces of advice, and hopefully they are, but I have encountered people who work freelance in the book industry who aren't always those things, who don't stick to deadlines, who don't respond appropriately to emails, etc. And word gets around about that kind of thing. I mean, I don't advocate being that person anyway, because I don't really understand acting in that way, and I think it's important to be professional. Also, for your own sake, if you want to work with this company again in the future and you're not acting appropriately, they're not going to ask you to work with them in the future. So not only are you not being a nice person to be around, you are actively harming your career. Point number 5 ties in with the points above. So if you are being visible to the world and you are professional and you're working hard, people will hear about you in the industry and they will get in touch with you. That is great, but it also means that you have to make decisions on what projects you're going to undertake, who you want to work with, any work that you might want to do outside of paid work, etc., which is quite difficult to navigate. For instance, I get emails with over 40 book review requests a week. And I review books on this channel outside of paid work. I occasionally work with companies to review books for a prize or for something like the Poetry Book Society, but the individual book reviews I do in wrap-ups, etc., that's not paid work. So I need to have a response that is personalised, but also something that saves me time responding to people with those requests, that doesn't take up too much of my day saying thank you very much, but this book is not for me. I also am contacted by companies quite a lot of the time asking if they can work with me on XYZ projects. That might be something to do with my YouTube channel, or it might be something outside of the internet, or it might be something to do with writing. And a lot of the time, the people who are reaching out from those companies are talking to lots of different people, are emailing many people at the same time, and don't really know who I am. Sometimes it isn't a great fit for us to work together. Most of the time it's not a great fit for us to work together, which means that me responding, detailing everything that I do every single time someone contacts me is a waste of my time. You need to respond personally. Obviously, I always respond to the person who has sent the email by name and refer to their company and do research into who they are. But then what I do is I have this document which I attach to the email, which says who I am, the work that I do, my credentials, and then examples of previous work that I have done with contact details. So I say, if it's a company that I would like to work for, hi, thank you very much for getting in touch. It would be great to work together on whatever it is they've asked to work together on. Here is a document attached with a little more about who I am and what I do. If you would like to discuss this further, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Point number 6 ties in with point number 5, and that is to set objectives for yourself, to make a list of things that you want to do, so that if companies get in touch with you and work opportunities come up, you can cross-reference that with your list and decide what you want to do and what you don't want to do, what will get you to where you want to be in the future. It's not always easy to work out what will lead to what, and there is a tendency to want to say yes to everything, and I think that that's great in the beginning, but there does reach a point where you have to start saying no and prioritizing what you want to do with your working time. At the beginning of your freelance career, you will have to do some work for free. I'm not necessarily saying that that is working for other people for free, but you will in some way have to invest time in getting better at what you do, getting your work out there in some form, whatever that happens to be, and that will be work that you do that is unpaid. However, as your CV expands, as people request you to do work for them, you should be paid, and you need to make a decision for yourself on what you will do and what your self-worth is. This is one of the most difficult things about being self-employed, especially in creative industries, because you're often taught to think that you should be doing art, etc., for the love of it. And that's true if that's your decision and you're doing something for yourself. But if you're working with a company that wants to utilize your art form in some way and other people are getting paid, then you 100% should be getting paid. You should respect yourself. But not only that, if you don't respect yourself, you're also disrespecting people in the industry who are also trying to get paid in these fields. If you accept work that isn't paid, then you're saying it's okay for that to happen, and that really isn't great for other people in your field. There are organisations such as the Society for Authors, there are other similar organisations for journalists, etc., and other creative industries that give you ideas of what you should be charging for certain types of events. So I will leave details and links in the description box down below. A lot of what I've talked about today is about being proactive in various forms, submitting to literary prizes, writing books, submitting those, being visible online, etc. But that also ties in with then people approaching you about work. So there's this feedback loop. You can also be proactive in pitching for things as well. I used to be terrible at this. I got very over-enthusiastic. I remember pitching an idea for a series of articles to The Guardian about bookshops around the world before I wrote the bookshop book, but I didn't do my research into it properly and they just never replied. So do your research into pitching for things. I will leave resources in the comment section down below if writing pitches is something that you are interested in doing. And this also feeds into the visibility thing. Whatever way you're being visible, through a website or through Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, blog, anything like that, you can afford to be bad at the beginning because people aren't watching you. They haven't found you yet. So you can learn while growing a following, and that is always worth bearing in mind. Final piece of advice is make sure that you have contracts for work. If a company doesn't provide you with a contract detailing everything, you can draw up something that's really simple yourself, just in a Word document. It might be something as simple as saying, my name is something, I have agreed to do XYZ for your company, my deadline for doing these things is this date, you have agreed to pay me this much, you will pay me within 30 days of receiving an invoice, I hereby agree to these terms, and then you ask them to sign this too, just so that you've got something in writing. If it's a large project and payment is reliant on them publishing it, if it's something written, you may also want to make sure that there is a kill fee involved, which means that if you finish it and they decide not to run it, they still pay you a certain amount of money. Taxes, I do all of my taxes myself. I have done for a very long time, and it is scary the first time you do it, but then you become more accustomed to it. HMRC in the UK are really helpful. As long as you don't leave anything to the last minute, you'll be fine. You can call them on the phone and they talk you through everything. But as I said, don't leave it to December or January. Self-return tax forms are due by the end of January, because in that period, that's when everyone is calling them panicking. But if you call them during the summer, etc., they can talk you through everything, answer all of your questions. So it's not something that you need to worry about too much. As I said, I do all of my own tax returns myself. I don't have an accountant, but that's something that might change in the future. And I think I'm going to leave it there for now because, as I said, there are so many other things that I could talk about. I hope that this overview was interesting, if not helpful. Please let me know what questions you have about being self-employed and freelance. Leave them in the comments section down below. As I said, I can only talk from my own experience and what I've heard from other people as well. So if you're trying to be freelance or self-employed in an industry outside of creative fields, I'm not sure that my advice is super helpful, but as I said, I always think it's interesting to hear from someone's perspective, even if it's a different one. I hope that you guys are having a great week, and I will speak to you very soon. Lots of bookish love. Bye.